Thank you all for joining us to talk about our upcoming report on culturally significant businesses in Black communities. My name is Jed Libby, and I am the Senior GIS Specialist at NCRC Research. Joining us today is Dr. Sabia Prince, who spearheaded much of the efforts of this project. Sabia is an urban anthropologist and artist who researches and writes about African American life and culture. A DC native, her books include Constructing Belonging, African Americans and Gentrification in Washington, D.C., and Capital Dilemma, co-edited with Derek Hyra. Prior to becoming an independent qualitative researcher, Prince worked at the Washington Office on Africa, Greenpeace, American University, and Empower DC. We are also joined by Dr. Bruce Mitchell, Senior Research Analyst at NCRC Research, who also contributed to this report. We will start off with Bruce introducing the project and its scope. Then we will delve into the report with Sabia and the interactive mapping project that accompanies this report. At this time, I will let Bruce take over for the overview. Bruce?
Thank you very much, Jad. So welcome to our presentation on culturally significant businesses in Black communities. And I want to start by thanking the sponsors of this study, the Kresge Foundation and American Express, whose support made this study possible. So when we speak about culturally significant businesses, what do we mean? Are these businesses that are focused on the visual and performing arts? Well, those businesses and venues, they're certainly culturally significant. However, we believe that that's a narrow definition. For the purposes of our study, we took a broader approach. We interviewed business owners in historically Black neighborhoods. This enabled us to better understand how small businesses operate and contribute to their community. As a consequence, we believe that a broader definition is needed that takes the neighborhood context into consideration. Finally, because of the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement, the profound political and cultural changes, and the COVID-19 pandemic over the past year, we want to know how these businesses are faring during this time. What challenges are they facing, and how they've responded over the past year. Our study focuses on the experiences of business owners in two historically significant Black neighborhoods. First, the area around U Street in Washington, D.C., and the Pennsylvania Avenue corridor in Old West Baltimore. These have histories as vibrant cultural and commercial neighborhoods dating back to at least the late 19th century. The area of Old West Baltimore, Pennsylvania Avenue, this adjoins the communities of Sandtown, Winchester, and also Upton in Baltimore. During the course of the interview, 5 major themes emerged. First off, culture. How does the business contribute to the cultural significance of the area? Second, what was the personal story of the business owner? What is their background, and how do they become involved in the business? Third, business operations. What were past operations like, and what are their current operations like, particularly considering the circumstances of the past year? The COVID-19 pandemic, what has been the impact of that on their businesses? And banking and financing. What were the experiences of the business owners in gaining access to credit or to assistance during the time of the pandemic? All of these topics helped us gain a better understanding of the role of small businesses in historic Black neighborhoods, a role that's crucial to their integrity as they face different challenges in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. As you'll see, U Street has undergone many changes related to gentrification of that area, while the West Baltimore area has contended with abandonment and disinvestment as business owners there reclaim the historic and cultural significance of their neighborhood. The principal investigator in the study, Dr. Prince, has more details about the study and the experiences of the business owners over the past year as they coped with the pandemic and other challenges. Dr. Prince, over to you.
Thank you so much, Bruce. In fact, Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the organizers of this event. Thanks to everyone for attending, and a special thank you to my fellow panelists for their contributions for this entire project. It was really a distinct honor to be able to engage in this project. The women and the men that I spoke with, I mean, they were very, very generous with their time. And considering the context, right? I mean, we're in a pandemic, and this was a period that's very detrimental for their businesses, very detrimental to them personally. And yet they made time for us, for me, usually during work hours. And, we were asking them very personal questions about their finances, which is not the norm in our culture. So, I really just want to give a very special thank you and honor to them. The gravity of all of that was not lost on any of us. And we're very grateful. In the time that I have, I'm going to present some of what those business owners shared with me in our conversations about the pandemic, about the culture of their communities, about the histories of their communities. And if you bear with me, I am going to now share my screen as well. So thank you so much for being patient. All righty, here we go. Thank you. I hope everyone can see that okay. So yes, and before I do get started on the key data that we're here to talk, I just want to really add briefly that by engaging in this project, we learned more than the findings that we were tasked with pursuing. This research gave us glimpses into two series of neighborhoods in cities that have very complicated histories. These are cities that are approximately 30 miles apart, so not very far in terms of distance, but these are cities that have frequently been viewed as opposites. And in the process, a lot of nuance gets lost and a lot of facts become obscured. Baltimore is characterized as more of a working class city, while DC has a large white collar federal workforce. DC also has significant poverty and a very vibrant Black and Latinx working class. Both cities have, in modern history anyway, been associated with a predominantly Black demographic, whereas Baltimore, unlike DC, has very noticeable white working class and very noticeable white low income population in the city, while the white population in DC is largely middle class. Baltimore appears to be gentrifying at a slower rate than DC. It certainly has a larger percentage of their native-born population. DC's native-born population has always been in the minority. That number is now 36%. Baltimore is 67% African American and DC is 46% African American. That's a number that's down from its height of 71% in the 1970s. It's also the case that both of these cities actually have noted levels of historical and cultural overlap, and that's remained largely unexplored. We discovered this, there's a lot more to be pursued regarding this DC-Baltimore connection. And with us being DC based, we did have a learning curve regarding Baltimore. So help from historian archivist Philip Merrill was very much appreciated. And we also did an extensive literature review to help in that area. In terms of what we're here to focus on today, our report presents data on 10 African-American owned businesses, specifically 4 in Baltimore and 6 in DC. And the breakdown looks like this. In Baltimore, we had a bakery, a bar, restaurant, urban farm, and a funeral home. And in DC, we had an optometrist, actually a woman-owned second-generation optometrist, hair salon, florist, gift shop, bookstore, cafe, housewares, gifts, and a virtual administrative assistant business. It almost goes without saying that none of these businesses were untouched by the pandemic, but the specific impacts were determined by the extent to which these businesses could, one, survive the onset of the pandemic when businesses deemed non-essential were temporarily forced to close and patrons were staying home, and 2, whether the business could continue to function at a survivable rate while complying with social distance requirements. Some businesses would have the ability to do so more than others. For example, those relying on customers eating indoors, or the need to touch customers in order to groom them or help them choose glasses. They would have different impacts compared to businesses where patrons could simply come in, make a purchase and leave, or those where it was easier to provide services virtually. With these assortment of characteristics, the manner in which owners respond to this dilemma of the pandemic, which we're calling the pivot, is going to vary from business to business. Let's move from generalities to specifics. For the sake of time, I'm going to zoom in on 5 of these businesses today. And these are Avenue Bakery and Red Funeral Services in Baltimore, and in DC, Lee's Flower Shop, Sankofa Video and Books Cafe, and Zawadi. I'm going to share some of our findings as these relate to culture, finances, shifts, and operations, picking up on Bruce's comments. This discussion is also going to reflect one or some of the 6 criteria of culturally significant businesses, which are history, location, function, relationships with the community or with patrons, context, particularly political economic context, and also symbolism. All project participants were asked the same questions. I always began in the same way. Getting that basic information, making sure I had their addresses right, the phone numbers, the emails, making sure that's correct, and then asking when the business started and whether or not the person I'm speaking to is the sole proprietor. After the basics were established, I moved to this list of 13 questions that the primary data set would be based on, beginning with the participants' geographic origins and other information about their families, how they started their business. You can see the questions there. This was when the first key patterns emerged. The fact that all participants had very deep, very strong ties to the places in which their businesses were located. Let's begin with Baltimore, because all of the business owners there were natives of that city. So they all had, these origin stories that were, very much related to that place. Some of them had older family members who were entrepreneurs in the city. Many went back numerous generations. One person went back 6 generations. They recorded expressions of duty, expressions of belonging to the people in their community. I'd like to introduce you to one, and that's Mr. James Hamlin. He is the owner of Avenue Bakery. And Avenue Bakery, that was the first business in Baltimore that we engaged. So Mr. Hamlin was the first man I interviewed from Baltimore. He purchased his building. It was located on Pennsylvania Avenue in 2008, and he then opened the bakery in 2011. He hails from West Baltimore, and I have to say, I just really enjoyed speaking with him. I enjoyed speaking with everyone. Mr. Hamlin was particularly jovial. He was very optimistic, and he had a lot of history to share about his community. During our conversations, he spoke about his love for his community and his desire to, his dedication to see it flourish. He waxed nostalgic about what the neighborhood was like before the 1968 uprisings and the municipal neglect that has come to characterize the area. He said that during his childhood, quote, there were many, many job opportunities for us. We had 3 newspapers. We had many shops and places, from shoe repair shops to grocery stores to pharmacies, that we could get jobs. Now, he continued, quoting, most of the businesses are owned by folks that don't look like us and don't provide any job opportunities for us, end quote. Mr. Hamlin, for him, community-based development and job training are what the community needed. And he talked with me about the need for young people to have promising opportunities and outcomes to look forward to and skills to be economically self-sufficient. He talked with me about his family and how they pulled together to keep the business afloat. Prior to the pandemic, Avenue Bakery was a major stop on the Baltimore History Trail, and they would receive busloads of tourists. All of that ended with the spread of the virus. He also had to cut back on operating hours, going from being open from 5 days a week to 3 days a week, initially replacing older staff like his mother-in-law and his wife with younger family members, such as his grandsons. Hamlin also stopped customers from entering the building, serving them instead from outside. There's an entrance to the right of the building there, where they would let people come and get goods that way. He said that his community has been profoundly supportive. They now constitute 100% of his business, whereas initially 20% of his business came from tourism and from out of state customers from Pennsylvania and Virginia. Hamlin characterized the Paycheck Protection Program as inadequate for maintaining his staff. He presently only has his grandsons on staff, with his wife coming in periodically. He says that he hasn't given serious consideration to closing at this time, but he has thought about entering into a sharing arrangement with the younger members of his family, or establishing a program for young people to learn how to run a business through his bakery. The second Baltimore business is owned by another Baltimore native, the Red Brothers. They are the sole proprietors of Red Funeral Services, a business that their mother and father started in the 1970s. Samuel Red was the last Baltimore business owner that I spoke with for this project. This family-run business was originally located in Sandtown. That's the older photo that you see there. They relocated a few blocks over to the Bolton Hill area 3 years after Freddie Gray was killed by the Baltimore police in 2015. Red shared that too many clients perceived Sandtown to be unsafe, prompting the brothers to move their business. The family still worships in Sandtown. They support charities there, not only monetarily, but also by getting involved in various community activities. They maintain relationships in that community through their congregation. One thing that we did not talk about in a specific way was death, right? And that's the subject that's at the center of the work that the Red family does. That said, it is reasonable to assume that because people will always die, the service that this business provides offers them a unique level of, it's kind of like a unique level of sustainability. So it kind of puts them in a unique category. Like other funeral homes across the nation, Red's shifted to offering memorials and funeral services on Zoom and other online platforms, as well as doing an increasing number of services at the gravesite where people could social distance, right, and be outdoors and minimize transition. Face masks are required. Hand sanitizers have been made available for people if they're going to enter into their building. The extent to which people could do that is going to depend on the number of people attending. So they would limit the number of people that could come in for services. Red said that for their business, this was easier because they did not do catering. They did not offer space for repasts. So they were not losing profits due to the pandemic in that way. He also reported that he received no support from the local government. There was no opportunity to obtain any as far as he was aware. He reported a negligible need for PPP funding support. His outlook for his business was not pessimistic at all. However, he did have questions about the fairness of how the PPP funds were distributed. And, this experience of documenting the backgrounds and the experiences of, West Baltimore business owners gave us a unique chance to explore a different narrative for this city. This is a city where all too often the conversation centers around poverty and crime and, these sorts of tropes associated with disinvestment and with ghettoization. And these are topics that are all too often used to bolster pro-gentrification arguments. These Baltimoreans that we spoke with discussed growing up in a working class community that was thriving, with a very rich history of African-American entrepreneurship, of community advocacy and achievement in the performing arts, among other areas. I also learned about a cadre of young Baltimore entrepreneurs, activists, and creatives making waves in Baltimore. Most are natives, but some are transplants from DC who find housing there a lot more affordable. And these are kind of ancillary lessons that added value to our project. And the same can be said for DC. In addition to what we came to learn, we left with so much more. This was in part an outgrowth of or a benefit associated with asking open-ended questions and picking up on cues from participants to follow up on. You come away with unanticipated patterns and contrasting data. For example, our comparative data revealed that all but one of the self-employed persons we spoke with in Baltimore owned the buildings that they run their businesses out of, a condition that may help them build equity or promote economic stability for their businesses. And in DC, the exact opposite was the case, as only one business owner there owned their building, and that was Lee's Flower Shop, which has been located in the Shaw Greater U Street area since 1945. I spoke with Stacy Banks, who co-owns Lee's with her sister, Christy Lee Jones. I believe Stacy's the one on the right. And these businesses were started by, this business rather was started by their grandfather, Richard, a Massachusetts native who left life as a Pullman porter to open the flower shop in DC, and he then passed the business down to his son, who was the father of the Banks sisters. Stacy Banks was very keenly aware of the cultural significance of her business as well. You know, she had a sense of what U Street once represented for African-American entrepreneurs who populated the area at one time. And she shared with me saying, quote, "This was the hub for Black people because we could not shop downtown at Garfinkel's. So we had our own little whole collection of businesses on U Street. They called it the Black Broadway, bars, restaurants, florists. I think we had a couple of florists, a couple of funeral homes on U Street, Black owned. My dad always said it felt like a family on U Street because everybody knew everybody, each other rather, and everybody supported the businesses here because they couldn't shop downtown," end quote. Banks and her sister, they said that they were actually enjoying record sales at least prior to the spread of the virus. After which, like so many entrepreneurs, the partners said they were unsure about whether or not they could survive the catastrophe. But then she said, and I quote, "We couldn't close down because we were getting so many orders," end quote. Their team set up contactless protocols for deliveries and made a number of other adjustments. But Banks was adamant about acknowledging the role of the community in helping their business stay afloat during the pandemic. The social justice protests that followed the killing of George Floyd during the summer drove a portion of this interest, according to her. And she says here, I quote, "We really have gotten a lot of support from the community. People were calling and making sure that this was a Black-owned business before they made their purchase," she said, and she also expressed her gratitude for the current state of her business. Lee's has 15 people on staff, and Banks expressed her gratitude that their business has been able to sustain these folks and their livelihoods. She says that during staff meetings, they check in with employees to hear their feelings about workplace safety, and they use that opportunity to reinforce the practices that they're currently engaging in. And here's another quote. She says, "We're just making sure that we all wear masks, face coverings. We all make sure we work at a designated station. We use our hand sanitizer, and we're just keeping all our surfaces cleaned off, using designated tools, not sharing tools, and things like that," end quote. At the end of our conversation, customers, as far as I know at that time, anyway, customers could only enter their business by 15 feet. And as always, they've had the options of ordering online for flowers and other items. Stacy also shared that there were aspects of the pandemic that made Zooming and staying home, made for an increased desire for plants and for some of the other household decoration items that they sell at this store. She received both PPP and support from the government, noted both of those and said they were appreciated. She was optimistic about their business and she attributed a portion of that to owning their building outright. The second DC business is Sankofa Video Books and Cafe, which is owned by filmmaker and Detroit native Shirikiana Garima, who is featured right there on the left. That's the person that I spoke with. She is from Detroit, and her husband is a co-owner. His name is Haley Garima, and he's from Ethiopia. When I spoke with Shirikiana, we talked about the impacts of the pandemic on their business, which actually sits across the street from Howard University, which is the institution where the husband and wife met each other back in the 1970s. Prior to the pandemic, Sankofa was a very lively place where customers could go in. I'm familiar with the place. I've shopped there, eaten there. Come in, get food, get refreshments to go to have inside, purchase jewelry, videos, various sorts of items there, books for readers of various ages. The space was also used for book readings and performances and lectures, as well as film screenings. So it's very much a community-oriented kind of a space. Garima described the period when Sankofa opened during the 1990s as a time when DC was, quote, known as Chocolate City, and it was a spirit that ran what we do and still runs what we do. It was a feeling of being in a place where you were part of a community, end quote. Acknowledging that the demographics of the city have dramatically changed, Garima maintains that they have been fortunate in establishing the deep community roots that their business currently enjoys. Quoted, "We were fortunate," she states, "in that Chocolate City, the Chocolate City spirit and determination of people with it just infused what we did and continues to infuse what we do. We feel like our destiny has been cast. As long as we have Black people that need us, we'll be around," end quote. And as her attitude reflects, Sankofa is a space where Black people from the diaspora can gather and share ideas and experiences that may be specific to their sociocultural, albeit heterogeneous positions. Aside from local grants, the Sankofa owners did not avail themselves of PPP loans and other funding sources associated with the Small Business Administration. Describing the need to have a relationship with a bank as a prerequisite for success, Garima said, and I quote, "We went to one and then they were not going to be able, first of all, they were very slow. We were drowning by the time they could even tell us that we weren't going to be able to get very much. The couple then tried a second bank, and by that time, they completed that process. She says, I began seeing difficulties that we're going to amass. She specifically described the convoluted measures for accounting for spending. Ultimately, they decided not to pursue this category of funds based on their assessment. She said, quote, one of the things that kept us in control of our property up until this moment has been realizing that banks are banks. They are not going to be sympathetic to your issues, end quote. She also said, again, in reference to banks, that given a chance, they will, quote, seize your property or get your money no matter what. When I saw all of the convoluted stuff around PPP, I said, this is one headache that I do not need, end quote. When asked about credit cards, she said that they were very careful about that as well. She used the company credit cards and she tried to get an increased limit, but she was declined. And she said that was very shocking because we had, quote, been such reliable clients. I'll just be straight. They said no. We had very high ratings and we couldn't get it, end quote. On the other hand, she did describe getting the micro grants from the city as being a very, very smooth process that she was very pleased with. She liked their approach, which was, all they had to do was give them name and address, a couple of pieces of other information, phone numbers about the, and info about the business, and voila. In terms of the pivot, Sankofa did initially shut down. When they reopened, they did not reopen the cafe portion of their store, which is actually, they rent that out to another vendor. They limited the capacity to come in. They really began to lean more heavily on their outdoor space, which they have in the front and the back. they shifted to a lot of online presentations. So they do quite a bit of those. And they also started partnering with the schools to provide students with packages, books and supplies that are purchased by their customers. So they use that as an incentive for their customers to purchase additional books. The final business that we're looking at this afternoon is Zawadi, an Afrocentric housewares, art and clothing and gift store that's been at its U Street location since 1991, so for 30 years. Irene Whalen is the owner. She hails from the DC suburbs. She's the sole owner of this eclectic shop that sells this just beautifully, goods that are just so beautifully reflective of her travels and her education and her values. Whalen described how her merchandise resonates with patrons. Zawadi is a place, she says, where, quote, they know they can go and find art, the craft, the culture, the diaspora, and Black Americans here. So it's a place of comfort. People also tell her that even if they don't physically enter the store, at, quote, as they are driving along U Street, they'll look up and see the sign and say, oh, she's still there. These are the personal community-based elements that keep Whalen going, she says. She's making her contribution to her community in a changing DC, and that's something that's important for her. Whalen also has a very firm grasp on history because of the length of time that she's been operating there on U Street. She says that in terms of the Black-owned businesses, the street had a very vibrant energy back in the day, back in 2000 and 2007. She says, quote, a person could come and shop the entire day. There was trade secrets across the street. There was wild women wear red a couple of doors down, end quote, she recalls. And she also acknowledged that there were some businesses here that are now owned by a younger generation of entrepreneurs, some smoke shops, and others that she may not be aware of. Quote, U Street is very special to the African-American community, end quote. She notes, but the cost of operating there, however, has made it very difficult, particularly for businesses like hers. Quote, there are businesses that may be doing very well, but for the business that focuses on the diaspora, on culture, it's been a difficult time, end quote. The value that Whalen places on the community and on her customers is very, very salient. It comes across, quote, I've built a very loyal and wonderful customer base over this 30-year period, and they've been very responsive, very supportive, and I take my hat off to them, and I give them a big round of applause because they've kept us going, end quote. Whalen maintains that Zawadi may have expanded its customer base actually in her pivot because she's added an e-commerce edition there. And she says in some ways it makes it easier for people to shop, and they actually have recognized that not having to come to the street and look for parking, for 30 minutes or more is an advantage. It's also possible that customers may continue buying online even after the pandemic. It's been a really good pivot for us, she says. And these are changes that have even positioned her to reach customers outside the DC area. She is finding customers in California and other areas. She did lose her staff person. Her one staff that she had to leave and go back home to Cleveland. And she had to cut her hours of operation. She was originally open from Wednesday to Saturday, and now she's only open on Friday and Saturday, pardon me, 2 days out of the week. So that is my time, guys. I'll go back, I'll unshare my screen. Those are just some of our data. We look forward to continuing to share data with you, with the public, and seeing where these conversations are going to take us in terms of discussions around poverty, policy, or studying culturally significant businesses in other locations. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabia. That was a great presentation. So along with the report, we released 2 interactive story maps that talks about the study areas and scope. On each map, we go over the history of both the U Street neighborhood in DC and the area surrounding Pennsylvania Avenue in Baltimore. Then the story shifts to the journeys of the businesses we had interviewed in each city. The visual approach brings out the stories of these businesses and about the challenges brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic and how they found ways to adjust to those challenges. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just to give you a tour of this interactive story map. So here we have one of those story maps, and in this case, we're going to stick with Washington, DC. So we start with a view of the city and its surrounding area. Then we will dive into its history and how segregation played a role in how the city was shaped. So much of this is pretty easy to work with. All you have to do is scroll through. A lot of this shifts over time. So I'll start with we'll begin with the history of DC. So much of DC's history had to do with segregational policies and restrictive covenants that were along racial lines. These racially restrictive covenants and social pressure pushed many African Americans out of more mixed neighborhoods into segregated communities where resources were reallocated to more affluent, predominantly white neighborhoods. And here you'd actually see a picture of the Republic Theater on U Street around 1945. The Republic Theater was probably one of the top parts of the economic hub of U Street to go to in that era. And lots of the residents that have been pushed out of these more mixed neighborhoods were brought into more segregated communities. One of them happened to be the U Street corridor. But this had a profound impact on predominantly Black neighborhoods throughout the following decades, since resources were reallocated from these communities. However, within these segregated communities, life flourished, with some neighborhoods developing economic hubs. However, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Triggered uprisings that led to the destruction of many of these businesses, especially in the U Street corridor. Here we actually see a spread of the minority population, and this is current. So right here, you could actually see where majority minority neighborhoods are located. They're mostly located in Northeast and Southeast DC, with more predominantly white neighborhoods existing in Northwest, and also Capitol Hill. So much of this kind of stems from a lot of like the shifts from those racially mixed neighborhoods to the more segregated communities. And when many of these communities settled in those places, those resources, including education or any form of economic activity, was then pushed over to areas in Northwest. So many neighborhoods then had to find other means of providing for their own and actually keeping up with their own businesses and their own neighborhoods. So through this, we actually see a lot of information discussing the history of U Street and Columbia Heights as well. And here's a picture of the aftermath of those uprisings in DC. I believe this is U Street and 14th, just where there are new developments currently. And the area basically went through a lot of destruction. Many businesses had suffered from this, and it would take a few decades for this area to recover, which actually paved the way for gentrification in the 21st century. And I know many residents in DC are very much familiar with the powerful force that is gentrification. And we have, there are studies that have observed the movement of this powerful force. Black residents were definitely impacted by this this new form of influx that actually brought in more affluent transients into previously low to moderate income neighborhoods, especially in Northeast and also the U Street corridor. So it was so impactful that according to NCRC's study on gentrification and displacement, between 2000 and 2013, it was rated, DC was rated the #1 most gentrified city in the United States. NCRC has then shifted that to 13th place for 2013 to 2017. However, it was the impact of gentrification was still very much felt in the district. Much of this led to the displacement of Black residents and families across the city, and these newer developments started to shape up these previously Black majority neighborhoods, especially on U Street. Right here, this is a picture of V Street and Vermont Avenue, right near where we now know as Shaw. And lots of these older buildings are now accompanied with these newer buildings in the background with values of homes being skyrocketed. So a lot of this led to the displacement of Black communities, and many of them ended up moving into the inner ring suburbs of PG County. By PG County, I mean Prince George's County in Maryland. Just to the east of DC. But on the map, you could actually see where a lot of the displacement occurred, especially in areas such as the Atlas District, H Street Corridor, U Street, Columbia Heights, Brightwood, and also other parts of the Northeast, including Brooklyn. So much of this actually shaped up the recent structure of the city, and the culture of many of these neighborhoods started to shift along with this displacement. So right now we're going to dive into the U Street corridor, and basically we talk about this historic area and lots of the figures that have come through, folks like Duke Ellington or Dr. Charles Drew and Elgin Baylor. Many of these really famous folks actually came around this neighborhood, and it's actually known for lots of impactful Black history. So here's a still of Duke Ellington actually leading his orchestra in New York back in 1944. He was known as a very high energy person, I've heard. So much of the corridor serves as a local economic hub, and it's filled with nightlife, filled with lots of businesses currently. And the main strip of the U Street corridor is U Street itself and Florida Avenue. Also another part known about this neighborhood is Howard University, a historically Black university that actually really brought more education and more culture to the community itself. It was founded in 1867 and encompasses a good portion of this area. Here's the founder's library, and this was dedicated in 1939. Very important symbol of Howard, considering, especially with the bell at the very top. So we go into the definition of culturally significant businesses across here. I'm not going to explain most of it, but I will say that they are essential to their communities, and that they've brought a sort of comfort to those who are very familiar with the area. And we start to go into the businesses themselves, including Zawadi, which Sabia did a really awesome job of showing on her presentation. We talk about Zawadi, we show pictures, we show quotes. Every single business is represented from the study. Black and White Look Optical is another one. We talk about a lot of these business owners' experiences, especially during the pandemic. and how how they have found their own ways of moving forward with lots of these challenges in place. Sankofa is another good one. Then we also have Lee's Flower and Card Shop. And that is it. I think I will go ahead and end it right there. So that's our report on culturally significant businesses in DC, and we are glad to be taking any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
All right. So my name is Jason Richardson. I'm the Director of Research for the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. And I want to thank Sabia, Jad, and Bruce for a great presentation. I'm going to start a question and answer session now, and I've got a couple of questions ready to go. But I do want to remind folks that you can drop questions in the chat, and we will do our best to answer them also. The first thing, and this was mentioned in the chat already, there was a question about, are we going to be doing additional research on other communities outside of DC and Baltimore? And ideally, we would love to expand this report and do research on other communities, not just in other cities, but also in other communities. And I believe one of the commenters mentioned South American, South and Central American, Caribbean, Middle Eastern. There are dozens and dozens of possible communities that I think are important to look at and understand, how are culturally significant businesses in those communities important to their survival and their development, and also how they're being affected by the pandemic or just by, other circumstances such as gentrification pressures, displacement of their consumer base and problems like that. So yes, we would like to expand this into a larger study, looking at more cities and more communities if we're able to. I did want to start off with a couple of questions for the panel, and this one I'm going to throw out to everybody here because it's one for us. This was kind of a new study in a lot of ways, especially by the inclusion of interviews. And there was a learning curve, I think, Sabia, right, to the challenge of getting busy business owners to sit down and talk about these issues. And you touched on that in your presentation a little bit. But I guess I wanted to ask of all of the panelists, though, what surprised you the most about this project? So we all kind of go into research with some sort of preconceptions, but as researchers, we try to balance that bias with our methods in our training. But there's always something that's kind of surprising. Did any of you find anything this time that just really kind of shook you a little bit or made you raise your eyebrows?
Hi everyone, and thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Jason, and everyone on the panel. I would say, I'm a scholar of African American history and culture, as you guys know. Entrepreneurship was not necessarily on my radar screen. I didn't really have a lot of expectations per se, but I will say one thing that did surprise me was the turf war kind of component to this. If you recall, we talked about in Baltimore and how protective people were there, and this sort of tension of people who weren't from Baltimore that were business owners. So there was a very kind of close-knit thing I felt in the Baltimore community. That is a city where they do have less people who are non-native living there. I think people in DC are much more accustomed to, people coming from other places. This notion of DC being a transient place, which a lot of Native Washingtonians don't really like that characterization because they feel that it erases them and people who have long history here. But I do think that contrast was really interesting, and that kind of surprised me. And I was also encouraged by the close relationships between business owners and patrons. I thought that wasn't something that I just was thinking about necessarily. And as you guys know, that helped to inform our development of the criteria for what is culturally significant when we began to uncover some of these data.
Yeah, that's great. And there's a question in the chat here. I'll just read it out loud. It sounded like a few of the business owners interviewed utilized support resources, whether from the federal government or local organizations. What do you see as the key to getting more Black business owners to tap into the resources and supports for business growth that are in their communities? And before you answer, I just want to throw in there also, we're also working on a couple of other projects related to small businesses and pandemic support programs. So I know that Bruce has done some work with our Women's Business Center looking at similar questions. Um, about the challenges that business owners face in accessing some of these. So, Bia, you also touched on that. I know in some of the interviews that it was a headache that they didn't need. For example, for the paycheck protection program
Sure.
loan. So, how would you answer that? What from the work you guys have done, what do you see as the key to getting more Black business owners to access these resources, or is that really putting a burden on them that's really misplaced? What was the challenge really here that for with the PPP program, the SBA bore some responsibility for making the program easier for small businesses to access? What do y'all think?
Well, I'm interested in hearing what Bruce has to say because I know he has a lot of information on that. Me less so. I would just say my observations would be I agree with you. I wouldn't put the onus on the business owners. There was definitely an issue of trust that came up, right? And that's a historical issue. There was an issue of a relationship because there was this discussion about having a previous close relationship with a lending institution. So that was a problem, and that's not the fault of the business owner per se. I think that sounds like that's a larger, perhaps structural issue. So yeah, those would be at least two areas that there needs to be more. The lenders need to be more aggressive. They need to be more open, and there's access to information. I think issue two, information being convoluted, complicated, and not necessarily easy to navigate the process of getting the funding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Jason mentioned the work that we've done with the DC Women's Business Center, and in that survey, we surveyed over 274 women business owners, and a large percentage of those were African American business owners. And what we found was that about 45% had been able to have some access to the SBA program, to the Paycheck Protection Program, or the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. So there was pretty high participation within DC. I think relating that to what we did in this present work for Baltimore is there seemed to be lower participation in Baltimore. And maybe some of that may have been impacted by whether the businesses had a banking relationship to begin with or not. There seemed to be just generally that businesses that had a banking relationship had much more success in navigating the paperwork and the difficulties of, particularly with the Paycheck Protection Program and getting a loan grant, in essence, for the Paycheck Protection Program.
Yeah. And Miriam in the chat actually noted, I thought she made a good point, especially for women business owners, that the return of after school programs and open schools, the requirement that usually the mom has to do double duty and, run the business and also take care of the kids or be a primary caregiver, is going to be something that they encounter also. Sabia, when we started this project, we all, and we've done quite a bit of work together in the past on things like redlining, segregation, and things like that. But we started thinking about cultural spaces and culturally significant businesses. And one of the requirements of this report was we need to really come up with a definition of what that meant. And I think you did a really great job at not only laying that out clearly, but discussing it in your presentation, that cultural significant businesses are different from other businesses because they tick several different check boxes, time in the community, place in the community, the services they provide, although those can be sometimes secondary to their place in the community socially. You were the one sitting down and talking with folks, though. None of us did. So when you talk to the business owners, do you feel that they see themselves as culturally significant, even if they didn't verbalize it that way? But do they understand their role in the community, or do they just see themselves as, just another business owner trying to get by? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that they do. I mean, that was a question that we asked them, and it seemed like that did resonate with them on numerous levels. I think one basic level is the geographic piece, right? Which was why we chose the neighborhoods that we did, because those neighborhoods are culturally significant, and the business owners have a sense of that. They really do. So they're already on that. They're like, this space is important. This is linked to our history and to our struggle. And you can't extricate that. You can't take those businesses out of that context. So there was a general sense of significance, and then you can get into the specifics of what they have to offer. And that was definitely the case, whether they provide food in what was described as a food desert in Baltimore. So people felt that that was significant. There were individuals that were like, hey, I grew up here. I know this space. I know these people. This is significant to me. These are my folks. I want to serve them. I want to be here for them, and that's really important, especially again for the Baltimore community, which is a much more disinvested area. So there's a sense of, almost like a sense of care, I have an obligation to be a part of this community and to be here and not to abandon folks. So there's that, and that was made us come up with the relationship criteria, right? That wasn't on my radar screen initially. We used the data that we gathered to build this sense of what is culturally significant. And then you have the issue of the products that they serve. And, a lot of folks said that. Shirikiana and Zawadi said that, and Sankofa. They both were like, we're providing a space for people to come and be here. This is not a racially profiling space, right? This is a space where we see you as more than just a dollar. We actually see you as a person who lives here in this community, and as a person that we have some sort of a connection to, and that we know what your needs and wants are. So we're going to give that to you, in the products that we sell. So I would say, yeah, it came across.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So, one thing that kind of surprised me, and we got a couple minutes left here in the Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, please put those in the chat, and we'll have our experts take a crack at them there. The one thing that I really noticed, and the reason we did two different cities like this, we really wanted to get a compare and contrast. And the one thing that really stuck out to me, in part because our team has done a lot of work on gentrification, was that the business owners in DC brought that up on their own. They noted that gentrification was a threat. That was not something that I don't think the Baltimore owners really brought up unless you prompted them for it. I believe, and that says a lot about the differences between those cities and the pressure on business owners. Another thing I noticed, Sabia, was that when you were talking to the business owners, the bakery is specifically in Baltimore.
Yeah.
He bought his business, or he bought the building at the same time he opened the business, or before he opened the business. He already owned that building. In DC, that's extremely rare.
Right.
Business owners often are beholden to a lease with a landlord, or they don't have a lease with a landlord, and that makes their position increasingly precarious. Each year as more and more pressure builds from gentrification, that they'll be displaced.
Yes. So, and can I add something to that, Jason?
Sure.
Because I think that gentrification piece is so interesting. I think, you're right. In Baltimore, some folks even said something like, I would like to have gentrification here, because of the disinvestment. And I think what that reveals is that people often conflate development with gentrification. I mean, there are other ways to develop, right? There's community-based development, and there's bringing other people to the table and figuring out what it is that people need and want, and not just slapping something down there in the interest of another, class or the real estate industry, etc. So I thought that was kind of what that represented, both the disinvestment piece, which is profound, to be very clear, and also that people, particularly in a disinvestment situation, do conflate those two things and think it's gentrification or nothing. Sometimes those are the options. We're left with having nothing, or we have to have gentrification, and like there's no middle ground there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And one thing you mentioned that somebody asked about gentrification from Baltimore. That was Bruce that got that question, I think, from an audience member at a conference, at an NCRC annual conference about 2 or 3 years ago. following one of our gentrification reports. They asked, how do I get gentrification in my area? And that's a good point. What they really meant was, how do I get economic investment? Gentrification, by definition, comes with an element of displacement, where people or businesses that are in the area are pushed out by that process.
Right.
When you don't see displacement, what you're really talking about is economic investment. And I think that's what they'd really like to see. Oh, we're a little over time here. I think we've answered all the questions in the chat, though. So I think we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank Drs. Prince and Mitchell and Jaded Levy for the excellent visualizations he did. We put links in the chat to all the reports and to the visualizations. I would really encourage you to click on those, scroll through them, see what you think. And if you have any questions, shoot us an email. We'd love to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.